Welcome back to Movies TV Mad. You can follow me on Twitter at Movies TV Mad. Please smash the like button if you love me. Subscribe if you're new. Please have your say, and a very warm welcome to Sunday's edition of the DC Universe Daily. And thankfully, we've put the April Fools away and they're going to be hibernating for another year. So piss off, you fools, and leave us in peace. Actually, it wasn't so bad this year. It's really difficult being one of the few intelligent people on social media. Oh, who says you're intelligent, Mick? I do. Although it's not that difficult to feel intelligent on these different platforms. Even far worse is to see the lack of intellect from people making and giving us entertainment today. But even far worse than that are the lack of intellect from the people who actually decide who make entertainment for us today. It's very, very difficult. On today's show, I want to look at James Gunn and ask, can he make a Superman movie differently to how he's made his other movies? And if he can't, I think that's a huge problem for Superman and his next adventure. Then after that, we want to leave modern day DC and its uninspiring environment that it's given us right now. A bit depressing talking about DC, as we'll soon find out. Modern day DC. So we're going to go back to DC live action and compare a couple of versions of DC villains in live action. I'm going to compare Gene Hackman's Lex Luthor with Michael Rosenbaum's Lex Luthor. I'm going to compare Heath Ledger's Joker with Jack Nicholson's Joker. That's a little bit later on Sunday's edition of the DC Universe Daily. So when looking back at James Gunn's CV, I didn't realise he was behind the movie Super. It's a very fine, cute, entertaining movie. But ultimately, what I noticed with all James Gunn's catalogue, the humour is very, very, the humour is very, very similar. The formula, the pattern of the formula is very, very samey. And this can't be the case with Superman Legacy. You can't make a Superman movie like you did Guardians of the Galaxy or the Suicide Squad or Peacemaker. It has to be different. It has to be huge. It has to be epic. It has to look grandiose. And to be fair to most other Superman movies, you can say they've been grandiose. Superman the movies, Superman 2, even Superman 3 to a lesser extent. Superman Returns looks very, very grandiose, and Man of Steel is the most grandiose Superman movie yet, visually, and this is what James Gunn has to do. So he can't be making a Superman movie in the same style as he's done his other movies. But the problem is, I don't see any variety in James Gunn's work. Of course, some of it's been a bit different, but at the end of the day, I just don't see a creative who does things differently. I just see a creative doing the same things. He's doing the authority. He's bringing the authority to DC Universe. So basically, these are a villainous version of the Guardians of the Galaxy, right? And they're going to be the new threat in DC Universe. So basically, we're looking at the boys versus Guardians versus Superman, basically. So if that's the case, then I just don't really understand, because, it's just the same thing he's already done. He's doing the authority because he likes working with groups of characters. So, when people say to me, are you excited about Superman fighting the authority? Well, I understand how that could be a bigger challenge for him, because it's a group of people with superpowers. And to be fair to the Guardians of the Galaxy and the Suicide Squad, they don't have any powers. But it's a very samey, similar, safe situation. Now, whether or not that can work, I don't know. I'm not saying it can't work. But a lot of stuff about movies, especially blockbusters today, is people's thoughts towards that movie, and that's what gets them decide whether they're going to watch it or not. People watched Iron Man because Robert Downey Jr. was in it, and quite a few Marvel stans went to watch it as well. But that's what pulled people in to that movie. So by the time you get to Captain America, the first Avenger, people are interested. The general audience are interested because we started a franchise, an interesting franchise that people quite like. Chris Evans was in Fantastic Four. This was a very controversial casting, but people gave it a try. Now, Marvel stans didn't actually like that film. I love it. I thought Chris Evans was amazing. It was a really great beginning. And, you know, a lot of people said that Captain America couldn't even be popular in this day and age, but he was. They did it. He's just purely a good person, and Chris Evans sold that to us. But going back to DC and DC Universe, when I think about Superman Legacy and I think about Superman versus the Authority, is there going to be any build-up prior to this movie on the Authority? Will we see them anywhere else? Well, unless we see the Authority cameo in Waller or one of the other DC movies out this year, which is very, very unlikely, people would never have heard of the Authority before. So that means people are not going to be particularly knowledgeable about the Authority. They're not going to care about the Authority. Don't forget that most people going to watch movies, the general audience, don't know the comic books. Just because you read the comic books, it doesn't mean they read the comic books. Now, I don't read a great number of comics, I've explained before. My knowledge and my love for DC and comics in general is from live action. Now, I think the comic book genre is very important. Without comics, there would be no superheroes or CBMs or Smallville or anything like that, or Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., whether you're Marvel or DC fan, right? I think they're so important, and I don't think they're in a healthy state. And I think it's so important that the comic book industry make comics that people can enjoy and read. So important, even though I don't read them, I think they're very, very important to the structure and future of superhero live action and comic book characters and graphic novel live action in general. So let's not get that twisted. But my knowledge is from live action. So we know that Superman has struggled in the box office in the past, and the advent of modern day filmmakers is to try and make Superman relatable. What's quite interesting is Superman didn't really feel relatable when he was crossing over to the Supergirl TV show. He felt like Superman. Tyler did a good job. He only started to feel relatable in his own show. He has 2 sons. He has a wife who is her own person, but they have a great love. And people are really finding Superman more relatable than ever in the Superman and Lois show. People found Clark Kent really relatable as a teenager struggling through his teenage years. So they made him relatable there. Now, in terms of Christopher Reeve's Superman, I won't go as far to say he was a relatable Superman. He was a Superman that you looked up to and said, wow, yeah, I wish I could be like him. I wish I could be his friend, which worked in the opposite way. So there's always been a way in. And I mean, Brandon Routh's Superman's interesting because he is quite relatable in the way where he's been away for 5 years and you feel his pain. He's come back. The world has changed. It's a bit like when you get older and things look different and scary like they do to people like me at 50 years old today. We see the world we're living in. It's divided. It's hateful. Everything's technical. You know, it's difficult, right? Everyone has a name and a box that they're supposed to be in. It's scary if you're someone from my generation. So that's why Superman Returns is relatable. You know, he's been away. Lois is now with somebody else. Nothing makes sense to him anymore. And he's gone to look for Krypton, and it's just not there. So he doesn't belong. He has nobody in that film. So that's what makes Brandon's Superman relatable. So how is James Gunn going to make Superman relatable in Superman Legacy? Well, unfortunately, because James Gunn just teases comic book panels but doesn't really talk directly about his idea. And I mean, he has, to be fair to him, he has spoken a little bit about looking at Superman's legacy in terms of his parentage, his biological home, Krypton, and his Earth parents, the Kents. Now, this is nothing that hasn't been explored before, by the way. This was explored on Man of Steel. We explore his parentage on Krypton, but even more, we really, explore his relationship with his father, Jonathan Kent, played by Kevin Costner. And what we get in Man of Steel is Costner's version of Kent's fears about his son revealing to the world who he is, and his biggest fear is his son being rejected, which probably is every parent's biggest fear, because we know what rejection, as experienced people who have lived a life, know what rejection can do. Even when you're dumped, or you ask someone out and they don't like you like them, it hurts, right? It's natural. So there's been lots of different, interesting, relatable ways. I think most live action Superman has done a good job at that. And in terms of Lois and Clark, The New Adventures of Superman, starring Dean Cain and Terry Hatcher, that was just moonlighting. It was a romantic comedy on the level of Superman fighting crime, and it worked. It wasn't for me, but many, many people loved it. It worked. So now James Gunn has to find a way in. And I think all he's saying about the parentage and stuff is okay, but it's nothing that hasn't been explored before. That's the truth. And I think you always have to find new ways of looking at it. And I think what Bryan Singer and, Doherty and Dan Harris did with Superman Returns was find something new, right? He's been away for 5 years, everything's changed, the world's moved on, and then you've got Lois Lane's article, does the world really still need Superman? And I think that was a great way into it. Now, that film didn't make a lot of money, but I still think that was a smart way to go into Superman in the 21st century, because the sad thing is Superman is kind of like your granddads and your uncles, aka me. I mean, I've got nieces and nephews. Like, he's our character. He's the older generation's character. But I do believe Smallville created a lot of new Superman fans because it appealed to the younger audience. And this is what you need to do. So at this moment in time, I'm not convinced that James Gunn has a new way at going at Superman to make him relatable, and that's so important today. And I also have this fear that he's going to make this film like he's made all his other films, and that's a problem. Now, that could not be his fault, because maybe the man just doesn't know any other way. And as I said at the beginning, the top of the show, this is the problem with the people who make the decisions on who is going to make and deliver entertainment to us today. I've asked the question, is this guy the right person, the best person to run DC Studios? No. And, Peter Safran, who's just produced a failed DC movie in Shazam! Fury of the Gods, clearly he ain't the producer to be producing these movies either. So there's, when Stans and Shields say to me, "Oh, Mac, you're so negative." Well, it's not about being negative. I've been positive, and, I have to give both sides of the argument, because my audience comes from both sides of the argument. So we're playing devil's advocate. You can't make a Superman movie like you make other movies, like you make a Suicide Squad movie. You're not going to get away with making dick jokes on a Superman movie. It doesn't work, right? So I hope, and I'm sure, because if he doesn't have the the common sense and the intellect to understand that Superman is one of the most popular nostalgic characters in fiction, let alone in comic book history. Even Stan Lee understood that. And Stan Lee would mock DC all the time in his younger days, in his peak. But if it wasn't for Superman, even Stan Lee admitted he would never have created Spider-Man or all the other characters at Marvel Comics that he did. It's always the older stuff that inspires us to do the new stuff. So that's very important. So a lot of people think that James Gunn is a pioneer, but I don't agree. And at this moment in time, it doesn't fill me with that excitement knowing that Superman is going to fight the authority, an authoritarian way, basically they have an authoritarian way of justice. And so it's going to be kind of Justice League, I suppose, or whatever, versus them. So it's kind of a democratic superhero team versus an authoritarian one. So that could be actually an interesting idea, because for balance sake, we should absolutely say that. But, you know, people want to see a proper, serious, full-on superhero franchise. And we've already discussed on many occasions if people are still interested in an interconnected franchise. I think if it's done well, there's an argument to say it can still be very, very successful. But I've also spoken about the red flags before, because they want gaming as part of this. And we know how, the gaming, to produce a game is very difficult, and they hardly ever get produced on their dates. And that's a problem as well when you want to glue that onto a franchise, onto a business model. You have to be reliable to be a business model. The DCEU wasn't a reliable model. It wasn't a reliable model. It wasn't consistent enough, right, for one reason or the other. So you need a reliable model. So I'm hearing lots of interesting ideas, but I'm not hearing much structure. And I've also spoken about before DC being this hollow, empty shell and not a real studio. So lots of things have to change before I start swallowing it. Now, what's very, very interesting, I think this is the month of CinemaCon. This is the month, I think, that CinemaCon will screen the Flash movie and maybe announce the rest of the DC Universe slate. Gods and Monsters, the rest of the Gods and Monsters slate. This is very interesting. I want to hear who works at DC Studios. I want to hear about the rest of these movies. I want to hear actors attached. Now, apparently, he's already cast the Creature Commandos, another group very similar to the Suicide Squad, to Guardians of the Galaxy. Do you see what I'm getting at here? He's a one-trick pony, and that's the problem. I'm sure Creature Commandos will be fun, funny, great animation, and when they translate to live action, like he's hinted that he's planning with the same actors, again, a very interesting, clever idea, but I'm not seeing any new ideas here. I'm not seeing James Gunn testing himself as a creative, and that lies the problem. We will see, everyone, but right now there's more questions than answers. When smoke gets in my eye. I'm sorry, I've got something in my eye. That's why I started singing that song. I don't know, I'm feeling in a random mood today. It is Sunday. I'm half cut from Saturday night. That's no April Fool's. Anyway, right now I want to look at the Joker and Lex Luthor in live action media, but I don't want to talk about all of them. No, we don't want to do that. I want to compare Michael Rosenbaum's Lex Luthor with Gene Hackman's Lex Luthor, and then at the end I want to compare Jack Nicholson's Joker with Heath Ledger's Joker, which I think, if we're honest, have been the best in live action. Now, we can go into Joaquin Phoenix, but that is a bit of a difficult situation. I did really want to focus on Nicholson and Ledger, but we'll get into it. We'll probably mention Joaquin as well, because Joaquin is different. I don't really like comparing Joaquin's performance. I mean, look, I love the Joker. I love what Joaquin did, and you know I'm really excited about Joker Folie à Deux, but I just think it's such a different situation because he's not a Joker in a Batman movie. I suppose you could argue he is the best Joker, but also that will be taking something away from Nicholson and Ledger. We'll get into it in a minute. Let's compare Gene Hackman's Lex Luthor with Michael Rosenbaum's Lex Luthor. Now, growing up, as I'll bore you again and remind you, Superman the movie was the first movie I ever saw. For years and years and years, I loved Gene Hackman's Lex Luthor, and because I'd never read a Superman comic book as a kid, I was very young when I first saw Superman the movie, I just thought that's how Lex is in the comics. And for years I said, yeah, Gene Hackman's amazing as Lex Luthor, right way to go at it at the time. But then I started watching Smallville, and I saw what they were doing with Michael Rosenbaum's Lex Luthor. And I was so wowed, I actually started picking up comic books and reading Lex Luthor. Now, in his early days, he was like an evil scientist, right? And he was very smart, and he would create missiles, and he was a genius basically, and he knew about science, so he was a mad scientist basically. And then when we got to the late 70s and 80s, I think it was the 80s and maybe 90s, they started making him into like this evil business tycoon, and he started having LexCorp and all of that. So all of a sudden I realised the version in Superman the movie and Superman 2 and Superman 4, isn't really comic book accurate. And I looked at him and I'm thinking, actually, as much as I love what Gene Hackman did with the role, and I think it's hugely entertaining, and he's a really good villain as a villain, he's more of a James Bond villain in Superman the movie, because that's what they did then. But yeah, so when you compare him to Michael Rosenbaum's Lex Luthor, he feels like exactly how Lex Luthor would be at a younger age. He's bald. Michael would shave his head every time he would come in to shoot a new episode, because you've got the stubble, so you have to keep on shaving it. So that's a big sacrifice in itself if you've got hair. Like for 7 seasons, he was doing that. But it was the performance, it was the writing. He really felt like Lex Luthor. So when you started comparing him with Gene Hackman's Lex Luthor, you got fucking hell. Gene Hackman's Lex Luthor is shit compared to Michael Rosenbaum. But again, I've already said, I respect what Gene Hackman did and I still enjoy it to this day. But wow, what they did with Michael Rosenbaum, was so much more special to me, and it meant something to me personally, because this is a very flawed young man. He's had a lot of bad things happen in his life. He saw his mother, smothered to death with a pillow. His baby brother, Julian, he's seen a lot of bad things. His father has brought him up in a very tough love kind of way. His mother died when he was young. So very, very difficult for Lex. And you see the difficulties of this character and the mentality of this character. And this is a backstory for Lex Luthor that we've never really seen before, neither in the comics or live action. And of course, this is a television show. So Michael and the writers had much longer to perfect this character and give him a story and give him a journey. Now, Superman the movie, they just made a movie. And, Tom Mankiewicz rewrote that movie. And he did, as I say, he wanted to make Lex Luthor funny. He wanted Gene Hackman. Gene Hackman kind of added stuff to it. That's what they wanted him to be. And, ultimately, Gene Hackman's Lex Luthor works for that era, for that decade, for that time, of humanity. But ultimately, when you compare it, Rosenbaum's version is a lot better as far as I'm concerned. But this is what happens, when things move on and you're like a little bit older than you were when you were a kid and you see new stuff, you compare it with the old stuff. And really, it's not fair. It's not fair of me to compare Rosenbaum's Lex to Gene Hackman's Luthor. It's very, very difficult. The only reason I'm not talking about Spacey's Lex Luthor, because he's pretty much playing Gene Hackman's Lex Luthor, and even he admitted he was more inspired in playing it how Michael Rosenbaum did in Smallville. So yeah, what Rosenbaum did was absolutely amazing. Now, if we move on to the Joker. Now, I've experienced Cesar Romero play the Joker in the Batman 66 movie and beyond, the TV show. I think he did a great job. But I really want to compare Jack Nicholson to Heath Ledger. So you can ask me the question, Mick, what do you think is better? Which performance is better? Listen, I'm going to be honest with you. I don't think it's fair on Jack or Heath to say one performance, one version is better than the other. Of course, I saw Batman 89 first. And what Nicholson does with that character, and don't forget, prior to his performance as the Joker, he was in The Shining. He was in many iconic roles. Jack was never typecast. Never. He always managed to play iconic versions of characters and move on to the next. So don't forget, The Shining was one of his most iconic roles. And that line, "Here's Johnny." Is it Johnny? Anyway, that's my bad impression of that movie. But that's the point. So he comes in, plays the Joker. And if you ever saw Jack on set, in the interviews in the BTS, you'll see I mean, I always imagined that Nicholson was this gruff, gangsterish kind of guy, but he's nothing like any of the characters he plays. You know, Jack was not was is a very charming person. Unfortunately, he's suffering with senile dementia now, or MS, or whatever it is. So it's very sad. We don't see him as much as we used to, and he's retired from the art form, which is a big loss to the industry and all us fans, of course. But to see him on set, he was excited. He clearly was a fan because he was loving it. And, you know, he was so receptive to what Tim Burton wanted to do. And Tim Burton was very receptive to what he wanted to do. It was a huge piece of casting. Casting Nicholson as the Joker was like casting Brando as Jor-El in Superman the movie. It was huge. But I just loved what Jack did with the Joker. It did feel like an accurate portrayal of the Joker, but again, he made it his own. He's insane, he's funny, he becomes obsessed with Kim Basinger's character, you know, but the whole thing, he's dangerous, he's frightening, he's funny, and his Joker laugh is absolutely fantastic. There's no real backstory for him, apart from the fact that in this story, in this film, it's the Joker who murdered the Waynes. Now, this upset many Batman comic book fans, Bat stands, because it wasn't being very faithful to, you know, the core origin material. But I never cared about that bullshit, being more of a live-action DC guy rather than someone who grew up on the comics. And, you know, I'm not saying you're wrong for being angry about that, but I think it works anyway. But there's no real, they're not trying to make excuses for the character. He's just the villain. He's there. But what Nicholson did was amazing. So I can't tell you that his performance is better than Ledger's, but I'm not going to tell you that Ledger's was better than Nicholson. I can't do that. But let's go over to Heath Ledger's performance as the Joker. Now, this is just a bolt out of the blue because, I mean, to be honest with you, I didn't really rate Heath Ledger before The Dark Knight. I had seen him, I think, was it in The Patriot with Mel Gibson? And Mel Gibson was bigging him up. Mel Gibson was saying he's going to be the next me, a bit arrogant, but he was saying that he's going to be the next best thing. He's the new kid on the block from Australia. He's going to be great. And you're thinking, well, Mel's saying this, but I don't see it. But ultimately, Mel Gibson was right. And Heath Ledger was an amazing actor. And, you know, you can't just give credit for Heath Ledger's, you know, Joker to Heath Ledger. Obviously, Christopher Nolan had the idea, the concept. Nobody thought this casting was a good idea. And when I say nobody, I mean nobody. This is not Jesse Eisenberg as Lex Luthor. This is not Ben Affleck as Batman. Nobody thought this was a good idea. You went from Jack Nicholson to Heath Ledger. Not many people knew who he was. We'd seen him. He got a lot of credit. But his performance is sensational. It's a very different type of Joker to what Nicholson does. So he's got another fantastic original laugh. Very different to what Nicholson did with his laugh as well. But there is this sadistic nature. But he's more intelligent than Nicholson's Joker. Because the whole point of this character is not to tell us, oh, this is why I'm doing this. Please feel sorry for me. And he has this habit of giving these backstories, these bullshit backstories on why he is who he is. He speaks about his father. I think he speaks about maybe his wife or something. Now, either one or the other is true, or none of them are true. We don't know. That's what makes him an even more fascinating Joker. And then we get Alfred's story about the guy in Burma who just blew stuff up and burnt the world because some people like to watch the world burn. This is this guy. But in a lot of ways, it's not this guy. Because the whole point of Ledger's Joker is to prove the world is as fucked up and shitty and cynical and just out for itself, just like him. He's not interested really in making money. The whole thing from the beginning is a manipulation to get to his end game. To give two different sets of people a bomb and put them in charge of it and see if they'll blow. One will blow the other one up to survive. That's the whole point. To see how shitty people are. Now, in this story, it's proved that people are not as shitty as he was trying to prove. Ultimately, I think in reality, that will be very, very different. So, an amazing version of the Joker. He put everything into the role. I remember reading interviews with him saying it really did affect his mental health because he put so much into it. Look, I don't know how he really died. I know he accidentally took too much of his prescription meds, so we have to go with that. Sounds a bit dubious to me, but a very sad loss because a very, very talented young actor. But at least he'll always be immortalised. But as I say, if you're asking me which one's a better Joker, I'm not going to tell you. Then you've got the Joker in the Gotham series, who is fucking brilliant, who challenges both Nicholson and Ledger for the best live-action Joker, if you ask me. Then you've got one of the best actors of our time, still making films today, right now, shooting the Joker sequel with the iconic Lady Gaga. Wow, that's going to be amazing. They're actually shooting on the iconic stairs from the first film. So you could say he's the best Joker. I don't know. I don't want to put one up against the other. All I'm going to say is, in terms of actors playing the Joker, we've been very, very lucky. This has been Sunday's edition of the DC Universe Daily. We've been Mick, your host with the most. Just ask your girlfriends and your wife, please like, share, comment, subscribe, hit the notification bell so you never miss this beautiful perfection. Smash the like button if you love me. Subscribe if you're new. Have your say. And I will see you in the next video. Until I see you again, goodbye, au revoir, auf Wiedersehen. And at some point, either on Monday's show or Tuesday's show, we will be reacting on this channel, hopefully, if it's all true that it's happening, to the Blue Beetle trailer. Really excited. I'll see you again soon. Bye-bye for now.